Two babies, sleeping, in a billionaire's hospital room, at 3:47 a.m., and the man who owned half this city was watching the nurse who brought them in, not with anger, not with suspicion, with something he hadn't felt in 6 years, something he didn't have a name for yet. Here's what nobody in that building knew. That nurse, hours away from being fired, for something he didn't do, and the man watching him sleep, already knew exactly who set him up. He just hadn't decided whether to destroy them yet. Wait, because what happened next didn't just expose one person. It exposed an entire system, and the man at the center of it all started with nothing, $62.14, and a choice that changed everything. This is his story. Two babies, sleeping, one man watching them like he'd never seen peace before in his life. Room 1703, Mercy General Hospital, 3:47 a.m. Ellison Brand, billionaire, board chairman, a man whose name made stock markets shift, was propped up against his hospital pillow, completely still, watching a nurse sleep in the chair beside him. That nurse, holding both infants across his chest and lap like his body was the only safe place left on earth. Legal documents covered the bedside table. 3 security guards stood outside that door. A board meeting was scheduled in 6 hours that could dismantle everything Ellison had built in a decade. And he hadn't moved, hadn't called anyone, hadn't said a word, because something about that image, that exhausted man, those 2 quiet babies, that impossible stillness, cracked something open inside Ellison that 6 years of ice hadn't touched. Here's what nobody in that building knew. That nurse was hours away from being fired for something he didn't do. And Ellison already knew exactly who set him up. He just hadn't decided whether to burn them down yet. Hi viewers, real quick. Has anyone ever done the right thing for you when they had absolutely no reason to? Drop it in the comments. I want to read every single one. Because what happened next didn't just expose one person. It exposed an entire system. The nurse's name was Darius Solen, 29 years old, night shift, room assignments that never ended. A man who moved through that hospital like he was held together by routine and prayer and absolutely nothing else. He wasn't supposed to be in that room. Not with those babies. Not past midnight. Not at all. But Darius Solen didn't make decisions based on what was supposed to happen. He made decisions based on what was right in front of him. And right now, what was in front of him was 2 infants who needed someone, in a room belonging to a man who couldn't sleep, in a hospital that had already decided his fate without telling him. Ellison watched the rise and fall of Darius's chest. Slow, even. The kind of sleep that comes after a body has been pushed past its limit so many times it just gives out mid-sentence. One baby made a soft sound, shifted, settled again. Darius didn't wake up, but his arms tightened, automatically, instinctively. Even unconscious, he was holding on. Ellison's jaw tightened. He hadn't felt anything in 6 years. Not since the funeral. Not since the collapse. Not since he'd rebuilt everything from rubble and decided that feelings were a liability no empire could afford. But right now, something moved inside his chest that he didn't have a name for. He reached for his phone, opened his contacts, scrolled to a name, stopped, put the phone face down on the mattress. Not yet. He wasn't ready. Because here's the thing about Ellison Brand that nobody on that board understood. The man was precise, calculated. He never moved until he knew exactly what he was moving toward. And right now, what he knew was this. Someone had planted evidence against Darius Solen. The access logs were too clean. The timestamps lined up too perfectly. Real mistakes left jagged edges. This was smooth. This was intentional. This was someone who knew exactly how the hospital's internal system worked. And used it. That narrowed it down fast. 1 of 3 people. Maybe 2. Ellison stared at the ceiling. The monitors beside him beeped softly. Outside, the city moved in its slow 4 a.m. rhythm. Delivery trucks, early buses, the first birds testing the dark. Inside room 1703, silence. And in that silence, Ellison made a decision. Not yet. He would wait. Watch. Let whoever set this up think it was working. And then he would dismantle them so completely that they'd spend the rest of their careers explaining the wreckage. Darius shifted in the chair. One of the babies, the smaller one, made a sound like a question. Darius's eyes didn't open, but his hand moved up, gentle, automatic, resting against the baby's back. Shoo. He didn't even say it out loud. Just pressure, warmth, presence. The baby settled. Selim exhaled. First time in 4 days he'd exhaled like that. Slow, full. Like something tight had loosened without asking permission. He looked at Darius Solen's face. Even in sleep, even completely broken down and running on nothing, the man looked like he was still making decisions. Still carrying something. Still choosing. Selim recognized that. He'd seen it in a mirror once, a long time ago. Before everything. His phone buzzed. Silent. Face down. He didn't move to check it. Whoever it was could wait. Because something in this room mattered more right now than anything vibrating on that screen. He didn't know what to call it. Didn't try. He just sat in the dark. In the quiet. Listening to 2 babies breathe and 1 exhausted man sleep. And for the first time in 6 years, Selim Rice didn't want the night to end. But someone outside that door was already moving. Already watching. Already making sure that, by morning, Darius Solen would have nothing left to lose. $62.14. That was the number staring back at Darius from his phone screen at 6:18 a.m., 3 days before rent hit. He was standing in the hospital break room, cup of coffee going cold in his hand. 2 overdue notices folded in his scrub pocket like evidence of something he hadn't done wrong, just hadn't been able to fix yet. He looked at the number again. $62.14. Then he put the phone away, because looking at it longer wouldn't change it. That was the thing about Darius Solen. He didn't spiral, didn't shut down, didn't stand in break rooms having quiet collapses while fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. He moved, always moved. That was survival. That was the only system he trusted. He'd been working doubles for 11 days straight. Day shift bleeding into night shift, bleeding into another morning where the sun came up and he was still in those same halls, same floors, same rhythm. Check vitals, log notes, respond, reset, repeat. No overtime pay above a certain threshold. No union rep who returned calls fast enough to matter. No backup plan because the backup plan was this job. This job was everything. It paid the 2-bedroom apartment he shared with his younger brother, Kaysen. Paid Kaysen's medication. Paid the storage unit where what was left of their mother's things sat in labeled boxes neither of them had opened in 2 years. This job was the thread. And Darius held it with both hands. Then 8 days ago the thread got heavier. His cousin Marcus had shown up at his door at midnight. No warning. No explanation. Just 2 babies in carriers, a bag of formula, and a look on his face like a man who'd already made his decision and needed someone else to live with it. "I can't do this," Marcus said. That was it. No context. No plan. He was gone before Darius finished reading the note he'd left tucked under the formula. "They need someone who won't give up on them. That's you. It's always been you. I'm sorry." Darius had stood in his doorway for 40 seconds, holding both carriers. Then he'd stepped inside, set them down carefully, and started warming bottles. Because what else do you do? What else do you do when life puts something fragile in your hands and there's no one else? You hold it. You figure it out. You don't drop it. The problem was the hospital. No children. No exceptions. Policy posted on every floor, which meant every shift since Marcus left. Darius had been smuggling 2 infants into the staff rest area in the East Wing. The one that stayed empty between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m. The one with the broken keycard lock that maintenance kept postponing. He'd mapped it perfectly. Side entrance from the parking garage. 2 flights up. East corridor. Second door on the left. He'd timed it. He'd memorized every camera angle on that path. He'd worked it like a problem that had a solution, because everything had a solution if you were willing to think through it and move fast. 11 days. Not one incident. Not one close call. Until the night he got assigned to room 1703. Until he got assigned to Selim Rice. The charge nurse had handed him the room like it was nothing. Difficult patient. Won't take sleep meds consistently. You're good with difficult. Darius had nodded. He hadn't said, I have 2 infants in the East Wing rest area and I'm running on 4 hours of broken sleep and black coffee. He just nodded. Taken the chart. Gone to work. Because that's what you did when the thread was the only thing holding everything up. You didn't let go. You didn't explain. You just held. But here's what Darius didn't know. Standing in that break room, watching his coffee go cold, reading that bank notification one more time, someone had already flagged his access patterns. Quietly. Internally. Without telling him. A senior administrator named Vance Okafor had been watching the East Wing keycard logs for 2 weeks. Not because he suspected Darius specifically. Because he was looking for something else, something bigger, and Darius's unusual 11 p.m. access pattern had appeared in the data like a coincidence. Except Vance Okafor didn't believe in coincidences. He believed in leverage. And right now, Darius Solen's name was sitting in a file on Vance's desktop, right next to the words, unauthorized presence, potential security violation, pending review. Darius's phone buzzed. New notification. His second overdue notice now escalated. He folded it back into his pocket, took 1 sip of cold coffee, and walked back out onto the floor. He had 12 hours left on his shift. He didn't have time for what was coming. He didn't even know it was coming. But it was already in motion. And the man in room 1703 was the only one who could stop it. Room 1703 smelled like antiseptic and control. That was the first thing Darius noticed when he pushed the door open at 9:47 p.m. Not sickness. Not discomfort. Control. The bed was positioned at an exact angle. The blinds adjusted to block exactly half the window light. The monitors arranged so they could be read without turning the head too far. 3 phones on the table, not charging randomly, stacked in a specific order. Darius had worked this unit for 4 years. He'd never seen a patient arrange their own room like a boardroom. He checked the chart without looking up. Selim Rice, 41. Admitted for acute exhaustion and cardiac arrhythmia triggered by sustained sleep deprivation. No visitors authorized except legal counsel. No photographs. No information released to any party without written consent from. Darius read it twice, for different attorneys. He finally looked up. The man in the bed was watching him. Not the way patients usually watched, with anxiety or boredom, or that particular kind of helpless frustration that came from being stuck somewhere you didn't choose. Selim Rice watched like he was taking inventory. Quiet, precise, completely still. Like every detail Darius carried into that room was being filed somewhere and would be referenced later. Your last nurse documented your sleep window as 11 p.m. to 2 a.m., Darius said. That's 3 hours. You need 7 minimum for your numbers to stabilize. Silence. You declined the adjusted medication dosage this afternoon. Still nothing. I'm not going to push it, Darius said. But I need you to tell me what's actually keeping you up. Because stress is on your chart 7 times, and that word doesn't tell me anything useful. Selim's eyes moved just slightly, like something in that sentence had surprised him. You always talk this much? He said. His voice was low, even. The kind of voice that had spent years being the last one in every room. Only when the chart doesn't make sense, Darius said. He hung it back on the hook. I'll check back at midnight. He turned to leave. Solen. Darius stopped. He hadn't introduced himself. Hadn't said his name. He turned around slowly. Selim was looking at the ceiling now. Not at him. The last 3 nurses requested reassignment within 48 hours. A beat. I'm aware, Darius said. That doesn't concern you. Should it? Another long pause. No, Selim said quietly. It probably shouldn't. Darius left. The hallway outside was its usual controlled chaos. Late shift handovers, a cart being wheeled toward the elevator, 2 residents talking fast over a tablet screen. Darius moved through it all automatically, brain already running the next calculation. Midnight check. East wing at 11:30. Formula at 11. Back by 12:10. He could do it. He'd been doing it. He pushed into the East Wing rest area at 11:22 p.m. Both babies were awake. Not crying, not yet, but awake in that particular way that meant crying was maybe 4 minutes out. He picked up the smaller one first. Malachi, named, according to Marcus's note, after their grandfather. The second one, Ezra, grabbed Darius's finger the moment he leaned close. Held it tight. Darius exhaled through his nose. "I know," he said quietly. "I know. Give me 2 minutes." He warmed the bottles one-handed, Malachi against his shoulder, Ezra watching from the carrier with those huge dark eyes that seemed to understand more than they should. 11:48 p.m. Both fed. Both settled. Darius looked at the time. He was already behind. He bundled them carefully, both carriers, the bag, the formula, and started moving. The plan was simple. East wing to service elevator. Service elevator to sublevel. Wait until the security rotation completed. Then back up to the third floor rest area. Simple. Except, the service elevator was down for maintenance. Darius stopped in front of the doors. Looked at the sign. Looked at the babies. Looked at his watch. 11:54 p.m. Midnight check in 6 minutes. He ran the math. Stairwell was 2 minutes. But the stairwell came out at the main corridor, too visible, too exposed. He could go back to the East Wing. But East Wing rest area locked at midnight. He could call it. Admit everything to the charge nurse on duty. He stood there for 3 seconds. 3 full seconds. Then he picked up both carriers and turned toward the main corridor. Toward the elevators. Toward the third floor. Toward room 1703. He told himself it was temporary. He'd settle them in the corner. Do the check. Be out in 8 minutes. Selim would be asleep. He wouldn't even notice. Darius pushed open the door to room 1703 at 11:58 p.m. Selim was not asleep. He was sitting up, 3 phones in hand, reading something with the focus of a man dismantling a problem piece by piece. He looked up when the door opened, took in Darius, took in the carriers, took in the 2 infants. One long, unreadable look. Darius didn't move, didn't explain. Just stood in the doorway holding 2 babies in the room of a man who could have him fired with 1 phone call. Silence. Then Selim set all 3 phones down on the table. Looked back at the ceiling. Said nothing. Darius walked in. He settled the carriers in the corner beside the window. Ran his checks, monitors, chart, pulse, efficiently, quietly, like this was any other midnight check in any other room. Selim watched the ceiling. Neither of them spoke. At 12:09 a.m., Ezra made a sound. Small. Testing. Darius was at his side in 2 steps. Too slow. Ezra decided the sound needed company. Started crying. Malachi, always solidarity, joined in at 12:10 a.m. The room filled instantly. 2 babies, full volume, 12:10 in the morning. Darius picked up Ezra. Reached for Malachi. Arms full, completely full, moving on instinct and exhaustion and the specific kind of muscle memory that 11 days of solo caregiving builds fast. The room was loud. He was out of hands. And then silence. Not because the babies stopped, but because something shifted. Darius looked up. Selim Rice had swung his legs over the side of the bed. He was sitting up, both feet on the floor. For line carefully positioned, looking at Darius with an expression that had no name. Not irritation, not pity, something else entirely. He reached out. 1 hand. Waiting. Darius stared at it. "Give me 1, Selim said, quietly, like it wasn't the most unexpected thing that had happened in room 1703 since Darius walked in. And what happened next was the moment that changed everything. This was the moment, right here, Darius Solen, standing in a Billionaire's hospital room at 12:11 a.m., both arms full of crying infants, looking at an outstretched hand he had absolutely no reason to trust. He should have left. Every logical part of his brain was firing. Hospital policy, patient welfare, professional liability. The fact that this man, this specific man, had more lawyers on speed dial than Darius had contacts in his entire phone. He should have picked up those carriers and walked out that door and figured something else out. He didn't. He passed Malachi across. Carefully. Deliberately. The way you hand something irreplaceable to someone who hasn't proven they deserve it yet. Selim took him. Both hands. Secure. No hesitation. Like he'd done this before. Darius didn't ask. Didn't have time to ask. Because Ezra was still going, and Darius shifted him to his shoulder and started that particular rhythm. The small tight circles between the shoulder blades, the low shoo that didn't need words behind it, and the room began to quiet. By 12:19 a.m., both babies were done. Darius stood beside the window, Ezra finally slack against his chest. Selim sat on the edge of the hospital bed, Malachi curled against his forearm, head resting in the crook of his elbow. Not speaking, not looking at each other. Just two men, two babies, one room full of the particular silence that exists only after chaos stops. Then Selim said, "Sit down." Not a question. Darius looked at him. "You've been on your feet since?" Selim checked the clock on the wall. "When did your shift start?" 7 a.m. Yesterday 7 or today 7? Darius didn't answer. Selim's jaw moved slightly. "Sit down, Solen." There was a chair beside the window, white, cushioned. One of those concession-to-patient comfort pieces that hospital designers included so families had somewhere to collapse. Darius sat. Ezra adjusted. Settled. Didn't wake. Darius meant to stay alert. Meant to keep his eyes open, keep his timing, calculate the next move. When to transfer the babies back to the carriers, when to slip out, how to make this room look exactly as it had before he walked in. His body had other plans. His body had been making plans without him for 11 days. And now, in a chair that was softer than anything he'd sat in since this started, with Ezra warm and finally quiet against his chest. His eyes closed. Not slowly, just closed. He was asleep in under 4 minutes. Selim watched it happen. He hadn't moved from the edge of the bed. Malachi was still against his forearm, warm, heavier than he expected, breathing in that specific rhythm that was so different from adult breathing it felt almost mechanical. Steady, uncomplicated, present. He looked at Darius. The man's face, which had been all forward motion and calculation since he'd pushed that door open, had gone completely still. Every line of professional composure gone. What was left was just a face, young, tired in a way that sleep wasn't fully going to fix, carrying something even now, even unconscious. Selim was familiar with that kind of tired. He'd built an empire on it. The monitors beside him beeped softly. He looked at the clock. 12:31 a.m. Outside the door, he could hear the low sounds of the night floor. Distant movement, a phone, the elevator somewhere down the hall. He should call someone. That was the correct response here. Press the call button. Have someone come collect this situation. Darius would be quietly documented, quietly removed, quietly processed through whatever system existed to handle this. Selim looked at his phone, picked it up, opened it, looked at the screen for a long moment, put it face down on the mattress. The thing was, he hadn't slept in 4 days. Not really. 30-minute stretches. Waking up with his heart doing things hearts shouldn't do. Every sound in this room landing like an interruption to something he couldn't locate. But right now, with the room this quiet, something in his chest had stopped its irregular drumming. He tracked that, carefully, the way he tracked everything useful. His heart rate was even. His breathing had slowed. He wasn't reaching for his phone every 40 seconds. He wasn't running numbers or projections or contingencies. He was just here, in this room, holding a baby, watching a man sleep, and his body was doing something it hadn't done in 4 days. Resting, not sleeping, not yet, but the thing just before sleep, that loosening, that permission, was moving through him quietly, and he did not move to stop it. He looked at Darius again. Who was this man? Not the chart version. Not the professional surface. The actual person who had stood in his doorway at midnight. exposed, hands full, no explanation ready, and simply walked in anyway. Not aggressive, not defensive, just present. Like presence was the only card he had, and he'd decided it was enough. Selim shifted Malachi slightly. The baby made a sound, that small searching sound. And Selim adjusted, and Malachi settled. And Selim felt something move through him that he didn't examine closely, because he had a feeling if he looked at it directly, it would be something he wasn't ready for. He looked at the clock. 1:03 a.m. He had 5 hours before his legal team arrived. He had a board meeting in 11 hours that could either confirm his recovery or trigger a clause that handed operational control to people whose names he was currently running down in a separate investigation. He had a problem, a specific, targeted, manufactured problem, sitting in a file on a server connected to this hospital's administrative system. A problem with Darius Solen's name on it. Too clean. He'd seen it that way from the first moment his own security team flagged the anomaly. The question wasn't whether it was fabricated. The question was, who had access to both the hospital's internal compliance system and the specific personnel files that would make Darius the most effective target? That list was short, very short, and one of the names on it was someone Selim had trusted. His eyes moved to Darius, still asleep, Ezra still against his chest. Both of them breathing in that slow, unconscious rhythm like the room had decided to protect them. Selim made a decision, the same way he made every decision, quietly, completely, without performance. He wasn't going to call anyone tonight. He wasn't going to report what he'd seen. He was going to let this man sleep. And tomorrow, he was going to start dismantling the trap before it closed. But here's what Selim didn't account for. Someone was already moving faster than him. The file had already been forwarded. Upward. Past Vance Okafor. Past the compliance department. Straight to HR. And the termination review meeting had already been scheduled. 4:09 a.m. Darius had no idea. And Selim, precise, calculated, deliberate Selim, had waited 1 hour too long. Something shifted in Selim Rice at 1:47 a.m. Not dramatically. Not with any announcement, just quietly, internally, the way a foundation settles after pressure is removed from it. He was still on the edge of the bed. Malachi had finally gone fully slack in his arms, that boneless, absolute surrender that babies do when they stop fighting sleep. Selim held him with a stillness that had become deliberate, not careful because he was uncertain. Careful because this was fragile and he understood fragile things. He understood them because he'd broken enough of them. Across the room, Darius Solen hadn't moved. Head tilted slightly, Ezra still against his chest. Both of them breathing in the same slow rhythm like they'd made an agreement Selim hadn't been invited to. Selim looked at that image for a long time. Then he looked at his monitor. Heart rate, 68. He noted that. Because 4 days ago it had been 94 at rest, and 2 days ago it had been 101, and his cardiologist had used the phrase autonomic dysregulation in a tone that meant, if you don't sleep, your body is going to make the decision for you. Resting. In a room with 2 infants and a man he'd known for 4 hours. He filed that away. By 2:15 a.m. he was running. Not literally. In his head. The place where Selim Rice did his most productive work, which was also the place that had been keeping him awake for 4 days. Access logs. Timestamp clusters. The specific personnel files that had been cross-referenced in Darius's manufactured record. Because that's what it was. Manufactured. Selim had spent 20 years watching people construct false narratives. In boardrooms. In mergers. In the particular kind of corporate warfare that never made the news because everyone involved had signed enough NDAs to paper a building. He knew the signature of intentional design. Clean. Consistent. No outliers. Real human error had texture. It was ragged. Contradicted itself. It left one detail that didn't fit. Darius's file had no contradictions. Every timestamp aligned. Every access log supported the narrative. Every violation appeared in the exact sequence that would make a compliance review move forward without challenge. That kind of perfection required 2 things. Access and time. Whoever built this file had both. Selim opened one of his phones silently. Opened a secure line to his head of internal security. Marcus Webb, not affiliated with the hospital, not disclosed to anyone on this floor. Typed. Pull administrative access logs for Mercy General personnel files. Cross-reference with executive clearance badges. Last 30 days. Flag anything that moved after hours. He sent it. Put the phone back down. Watched Darius not wake up. By 3:30 a.m., Webb had responded. Selim read the message twice. Then sat completely still for 47 seconds. Because the name at the top of that list wasn't Vance Okafor. Vance was in there. Third from the top. Access logged, timestamps consistent, clearly part of the mechanism. But the first name, executive clearance. After hours access. Badge logged at 11:14 p.m. on a night Selim now recognized. The same night Darius had been formally assigned to his room. The same night this whole thing started moving. The first name was Ellison Brand. Board member. 15-year relationship with Selim's company. One of 3 people Selim had trusted with information that didn't appear in any public filing. Selim looked at that name for a long time. His face didn't change. That was the thing about Selim Rice that people consistently underestimated. His face never changed. But underneath something went very cold and very deliberate and very focused. He set the phone down. Looked at Darius. Still asleep. Still holding Ezra with both arms like protection was something his body did automatically. Even unconscious, even running on empty. Even when the world was doing everything it could to remove every resource he had. Something happened in Selim's chest. He didn't name it, but it made a decision before his brain finished the sentence. He picked up his legal phone, opened a text thread. His lead counsel, Avery Osei, the one person in his professional life who moved as fast and as quietly as Selim himself. Mercy General, Internal HR. There's a termination review scheduled for 9 a.m. tomorrow. Darius Solen, night shift nurse. Pull the file. Compare it against what Webb is sending you. I want to hold on that meeting by 7 a.m. No communication to the hospital administration until I authorize it. He sent it. Then, this is time sensitive. Don't sleep. Avery responded in 3 minutes. Already moving. Selim put the phone down. The monitors beeped. Heart rate, 64. He hadn't clocked a number that low since admission. He looked at the clock. 3:47 a.m. Something about that time felt familiar. He shifted Malachi gently, adjusting his arm, and the baby made a small sound and curled tighter, and Selim went completely still until the breathing evened out again. Then he looked up, and Darius was awake. Just barely. Eyes open, blinking slowly, still holding Ezra. Looking at Selim from across the room with the particular expression of a man whose brain was loading back from somewhere very far down. They looked at each other. Neither spoke. There was no language for what this room had become between midnight and 4 a.m. Finally Darius straightened, shifted Ezra carefully, looked at the clock. Something moved across his face. I need to. I know, Selim said. Darius stood, quietly. He transferred Ezra to the carrier with practiced efficiency, then crossed and, without asking, without waiting, reached for Malachi. Selim passed him over. Their hands were close for one moment. Neither acknowledged it. Darius settled both boys. Picked up the bag. Checked his watch. Moved toward the door. Solen. He stopped. Didn't turn around immediately. Then did. Selim looked at him. Direct. Unreadable. Get some rest, he said. Before your shift starts. Darius looked at him for a second that was longer than it should have been. Then he nodded. And walked out. The door closed. The room was quiet. Selim laid back against the pillow. Heart rate, 61. And then, for the first time in 4 days, his eyes closed and stayed closed. Downstairs, a file was sitting in an HR inbox with Darius's name at the top. Down the hall, Vance Okafor was already at his desk. And Ellison Brand was on the phone with someone who didn't appear in any public record connected to Selim's company, saying 3 words. It's already done. It wasn't. But nobody had told him that yet. The morning came in fast. Too fast. 6:52 a.m. Mercy General. 3rd floor nursing station. Darius was mid-chart when the charge nurse. Tamara Weeks, 22 years on this floor, the kind of woman who knew everything before you finished saying it, walked up beside him and set a hand flat on the counter. Not loud, just placed it there, like a door closing. HR wants you at 9, she said quietly. Darius didn't look up from the chart immediately. 1 second. 2. Then he looked up. Tamara's face was doing something he'd never seen it do in 4 years. It was careful. What for? He said. She held his eyes. Didn't answer. And that right there told him everything the words hadn't. He set the chart down. Tamara. I don't have details, she said. I just know it came from above compliance. And I know it came through fast. Fast. That word landed somewhere in his chest and sat there. Because fast meant this wasn't routine. Fast meant someone had pushed it. Fast meant there were already decisions made in rooms he hadn't been invited to, about a future he hadn't been told was in question. Okay, Darius said. Just, okay. He picked the chart back up. Tamara watched him for a second longer than she needed to, then walked away. Darius finished his notes. Transferred 2 patients. Checked in on room 1703 at 7:15 a.m. Door cracked. Selim asleep. Monitor steady. Numbers the best they'd been since admission. He stood in the doorway for exactly 4 seconds, then kept moving, because standing still was not something he knew how to do when the ground was shifting. He didn't know about the hold. Didn't know that at 6:58 a.m., an attorney named Avery Osei had placed a formal legal flag on the HR file bearing his name. Didn't know that the flag cited procedural irregularities, fabricated timestamps, and, critically, unauthorized use of executive clearance credentials to access personnel records. He didn't know any of that. He just knew 9 a.m. was coming, and the $62.14 in his account, and the 2 boys asleep in the East Wing rest area, and the fact that if he lost this job today, there was no next move. He'd run the math on that. Many times, there was no next move. So he worked. Patient in 1706 needed vitals. Patient in 1710 hadn't eaten since yesterday. Patient in 1712 was asking about discharge and someone needed to coordinate with the attending before rounds. Darius moved through all of it. Precise. Present. No waste. 8:17 a.m. He slipped into the East Wing rest area. Fed both boys. Malachi was fussier than usual, maybe picking up on something. Babies did that. And it took 12 extra minutes to settle him. 8:43 a.m. He walked back to the nursing station. 8:51 a.m. Tamara caught his eye across the floor, tilted her head toward the elevator. Darius nodded. He straightened his badge, took the elevator to the administrative floor. And here is what nobody, not Vance Okafor, not the HR director, not Ellison Brand on his private call the night before, had accounted for. The conference room outside HR was not empty. It should have been empty. It was 8:58 a.m., 2 minutes early. The HR director hadn't arrived yet. But the room was not empty. Avery Osei was already seated at the table. Navy suit, portfolio open, a laptop screen showing, and Darius could see this from the doorway, what appeared to be access log data. Highlighted, annotated, printed in color and stacked in a neat pile beside the laptop. Avery looked up when Darius appeared in the door. Darius Solen? Yeah. Sit down. He gestured to the chair across from him. We have about 90 seconds before this meeting starts, so I'm going to be direct. Darius sat. The file they built against you is fraudulent, Avery said. We can prove it. The meeting this morning is not going to end the way they planned. Darius looked at him. Who are you? Avery Osei. I represent a client who has an interest in making sure you don't lose your job today. He closed the laptop. I can't tell you more than that right now. Darius sat with that for exactly 2 seconds. And what do I do? Nothing, Avery said. You sit here. You let me talk. And whatever they put in front of you, you don't sign. The door opened. HR Director Camille Pruitt walked in. 53. Efficient. The kind of administrator who moved through personnel actions the way a surgeon moved through a procedure. Not cruel, just precise. She stopped when she saw Avery. Something crossed her face. It wasn't surprise exactly. It was the look of someone whose math had just stopped adding up. Mr. Osei, she said. Ms. Pruitt. He stood briefly, sat again. Whenever you're ready. She set her folder on the table. And the meeting began. But Vance Okafor, who was supposed to be the third person in that room, the one who would walk through the evidence file and present the timeline and make the whole thing look airtight, Vance Okafor hadn't arrived yet. Because Vance Okafor was in a stairwell on the 4th floor. On the phone. With someone whose name hadn't appeared in any of the logs. Saying, "They have something. I don't know how much. Don't move yet." The person on the other end didn't respond immediately. Then, "It doesn't matter. The decision's already been made." What decision? Vance didn't get to ask. Because his badge, his executive clearance badge, had just been suspended. Remotely. By someone with override authority he hadn't known existed until it was used against him. He looked at his phone. Then at the stairwell door. And for the first time in a very long career of careful, deliberate moves, Vance Okafor didn't know what to do next. The file hit the table at 9:06 a.m. Camille Pruitt slid it across with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 100 times. Darius looked at it. Didn't touch it. Because Avery had said don't sign anything. He hadn't said don't look. So Darius looked. His name, date of hire, employment record, clean, 4 years. Not a single formal complaint. And then, attached behind it, the incident report. 12 pages. Darius had never seen 12-page incident reports. Not for the things that actually happened on this floor. A real violation got 2 pages. Maybe 3. 12 pages meant someone had been building this. For a while. Mr. Solen, Camille began. We received a compliance flag 2 weeks ago regarding unauthorized access to restricted areas during off hours. The report documents 14 separate instances across a 22-day period. 14. Darius had been at this 11 days. He didn't say that yet. Additionally, there are records showing. I'm going to stop you there, Avery said. Not loud, not aggressive, just complete, like closing a window. Camille paused. The access log data cited in that report, Avery continued, was pulled from an administrative system that was accessed on 6 occasions using executive clearance credentials that do not belong to any nurse, orderly, or patient-facing staff member on this floor. He opened his folder, slid one sheet across, then another, then a third. These are the badge logs, times, credential IDs, and, most relevantly, the IP address from which 2 of those access events were initiated. Camille looked at the sheets. Her expression didn't break. But something behind it, something in the way her eyes moved, shifted. That IP address, Avery said, belongs to a workstation registered to a senior administrator in this building. Not a compliance officer. An administrator. Silence. Full, complete, load-bearing silence. The 14 incidents in your report, Avery continued, don't exist in the raw system logs. They were entered, after the fact, using access that Mr. Solen, on a night shift nurse's clearance, could not have obtained. Camille looked at the sheets again, then at Darius, then back at Avery. This would require verification, she said carefully. Of course. Avery slid across a 4th sheet. This is a formal preservation order for all administrative access logs from the relevant period. Your IT department received it 11 minutes ago. Nothing can be altered or deleted while it's active. Darius sat very still. He was watching Camille Pruitt's face. Watching the exact moment a person realizes they've been handed something real. Not a delay tactic, not a legal bluff, but actual, structured, evidenced reality. That moment looked like a pause. A very specific pause. The kind where the next sentence being chosen isn't the one that was planned. I'll need to postpone this meeting, Camille said. That's fine, Avery said. Mr. Solen will return to his shift. He looked at Darius. One nod. Darius stood, picked up his badge off the table where he'd set it. A habit, something he did without thinking. Clipped it back on. Walked out of the conference room. The hallway outside was bright. Morning light through the east windows. A cleaning cart moving slowly at the far end. Darius stood outside the conference room door for 3 seconds. 3. Then he started walking. Back toward the elevator. Back toward the floor. His hands were steady. His face was forward. But inside, something was happening that he didn't have time to process and wasn't going to let himself process until he was somewhere private and the babies were fed and Kaysen's medication was sorted for the week and everything that needed holding was held. He pressed the elevator button. Waited. The doors opened. He stepped in. And as the doors closed, for exactly the 4 seconds it took to travel 1 floor, he closed his eyes. Exhaled. 1 full breath. Then the doors opened and he was back on the 3rd floor and Tamara was already watching from the station and he walked toward her and she read his face in the way she'd been reading faces for 22 years and she just nodded. No questions. Just nodded. And handed him a chart. Darius took it. Got back to work. But here's what he still didn't know. The meeting being postponed wasn't a victory. Not yet. Because Camille Pruitt had walked back to her office and immediately made 2 calls. The first was to the hospital's legal department. The second was to a board member. Not Ellison Brand. A different name. Someone who had been on the board for 8 years and had never once been publicly connected to any personnel action, any compliance issue, any of the quiet internal moves that shaped how this hospital operated. Someone who had, until this morning, been invisible in all of this. His name was Desmond Fay. And when Camille told him what had happened in that conference room, he didn't react the way she expected. He didn't express concern. He didn't ask questions. He just said, "Good," and hung up. Camille held the phone for a moment, then set it down slowly, because that response didn't track. And things that didn't track, in her experience, meant there was a layer to this she hadn't been shown. She was right. She just didn't know how many layers there were. Or how long someone had been watching, waiting, measuring exactly what everyone in this building was made of. Selim Rice was sitting up in bed at 10:23 a.m. when Marcus Webb's second message came through. He read it once, sat with it, read it again, then set the phone face down and looked at the wall. Because the second message wasn't about Vance Okafor. It wasn't about the fabricated compliance file. It wasn't even about Ellison Brand, whose name Selim had already been building a case around for 72 hours. The second message was about Desmond Fay, and what Webb had found in the deeper logs. The ones beneath the ones Avery had already pulled, the ones that required a level of access that most people in this building didn't know existed, changed the shape of everything. Desmond Fay had not accessed Darius's personnel file. He had accessed Selim's. 3 weeks before the admission, medical projections, cardiac risk assessments, the private psychiatric evaluation that Selim had undergone under a different name at a facility with no digital footprint, except apparently one. Someone had found it, logged it, and used it to calculate something. Selim thought about that, precisely, the way he thought about everything, stripping it down to mechanism, removing the noise, following the logic to its actual conclusion. Desmond Fay wasn't trying to destroy Darius Solen. Darius was a tool, a test. The real question Desmond had been asking, the question this entire manufactured situation had been designed to answer, was, what will Selim do when someone completely powerless is set up in front of him? Will he intervene? Will he protect? Or will he look away? Selim had been on that board long enough to know what that question meant. There was a succession clause, buried in the original operating agreement written 15 years ago, rarely discussed. If Selim's health deteriorated to a point where his judgment was considered compromised, the board had the authority to invoke operational review. The vote required a 2/3 majority. Ellison Brand had 3 votes in his pocket. But the clause had a counter-provision. If the chair demonstrated, in a verifiable, documented way, that their judgment remained sound under pressure, the review could be preemptively invalidated. Desmond Fay had been on that board for 8 years. He'd written that counter-provision. He knew exactly what it required. So he'd built a pressure test. Real stakes. Real consequences. A real person whose situation couldn't be faked, because Darius Solen's circumstances were too specific, too detailed, too raw to be constructed. He was exactly what he appeared to be, and Desmond had put that in front of Selim. And watched. Selim looked at the wall for a long time. Then he picked up his phone, called a number. It rang twice. Mr. Rice. The voice was measured, calm. The voice of a man who had been expecting this call. Desmond, Selim said. A pause. You figured it out, Desmond said. Not a question. The counter-provision. The succession vote. Ellison's 3 proxies. A beat. You needed documentation. Behavioral documentation. Something that couldn't be argued in a board meeting. Silence on the line. You could have just asked me, Selim said. You would have performed, Desmond said simply. This way you just were. Selim looked at the monitors. Heart rate, 66. He thought about 3:47 a.m. Malachi against his forearm. Darius's face going slack with sleep. The specific quality of quiet that had settled into that room like it had been waiting for permission. The succession vote, Selim said. When? Board meeting. Thursday. Ellison is planning to move formally. And your vote? A pause. That depends, Desmond said. On what you do in the next 48 hours. Selim's jaw tightened. Darius Solen's file will be fully cleared by end of day, Desmond said. Vance Okafor's credentials have already been suspended. Ellison's involvement is documented. I've been building that case separately. I needed Ellison to move so I had actionable evidence. You used Solen as bait, Selim said. I used the situation, Desmond said carefully. There's a difference. Is there? It wasn't a question. Silence. He never broke, Desmond said quietly. Not defensively, just as a fact. 14 incidents in that fabricated file. 2 weeks of manufactured pressure. A 9 a.m. termination meeting with no warning and no advocate. A pause. And he showed up, did his job, said nothing. Selim said nothing. You intervened at 1 a.m., Desmond said. You pulled legal at 6:58. You moved before you had complete information. Another pause. That's not compromise, Selim. That's judgment. The line was quiet for a moment. Ellison doesn't know you know, Desmond said. He's planning to walk into Thursday's meeting thinking the succession vote is clean. It won't be, Selim said. No, Desmond agreed. It won't. A beat. The nurse, Desmond said. His name is Darius Solen, Selim said flatly. Darius Solen, Desmond repeated. What happens to him? Selim looked at the door. Thought about a chart being carried through the hall at 7:15 a.m. A man who didn't stop moving even when the ground was shifting. That's being handled, Selim said. He ended the call, picked up his legal phone, opened a new thread. Avery Osei, Thursday, board meeting. I need everything on Ellison Brand's proxy arrangements and the succession clause cross-referenced with behavioral documentation from the last 72 hours. Full package. Nothing missing. He sent it, then opened a second message. To a different contact. One that didn't appear in any of his corporate communications. His CFO. Privately. I need you to run a compensation restructuring scenario. 1 new position. Executive Patient Liaison Medical Operations. Senior level. Benefits, equity component, full protection clause. Have it ready by Wednesday. He paused before sending. Added 1 line. Make it something someone can actually live on. Sent it. Then laid back. Heart rate, 63. Outside his door, the floor moved in its rhythm. Down the hall, Darius Solen was charting patient notes he'd been 3 hours behind on and had just caught up. He didn't know about the call. Didn't know about Thursday. Didn't know that 2 men. One he'd barely spoken to, one he'd never met, had spent the last several hours building something around his name. He was just working. The way he always worked. The only way he knew how. But Ellison Brand, who was at that moment sitting in a car outside Mercy General, on a call with his third proxy, saying, "Thursday is confirmed, don't change anything." Ellison Brand had no idea that the man he'd spent 3 weeks trying to destabilize was already 3 moves ahead, and had been since 1 a.m. Thursday arrived like a verdict. 9 a.m., 42nd floor. Rice Capital's main boardroom. Floor-to-ceiling glass. The city below. A table that seated 16 and currently held 11. The full active board, minus 2 who had sent proxies, minus Selim, who had been discharged from Mercy General the previous afternoon and had walked into this building 20 minutes ago looking like a man who had slept and meant it. Because he had. For the first time in weeks. Ellison Brand sat 3 seats to the left of the head chair. 61. Silver at the temples. The particular kind of polished that came from spending decades in rooms where appearance was currency. He looked confident. He looked ready. He had 3 proxy commitments. He had the succession clause language memorized. He had a statement prepared, measured, collegial, framed entirely as concern rather than ambition. He had everything, or he thought he did. Selim walked in at 9:04 a.m. No speech. No preamble. He sat at the head of the table, set down one folder, and looked at the room. "We'll skip standard agenda," he said. "We have something more pressing." Ellison's expression didn't move. Selim opened the folder, slid the first document to the center of the table. Badge access logs. Mercy General Hospital. Administrative system. 14 days. Silence. These show executive clearance credentials being used to access personnel files belonging to a non-management hospital employee. He slid a second document. These are the IP records confirming where those access events originated. The third. This is a cross-reference with internal communications showing coordination between the credential holder and at least one proxy vote committed to this table for today's meeting. Someone at the far end of the table shifted in their chair. Ellison Brand did not move. Selim looked at him. Direct. Steady. No heat in it. No performance. Just facts delivered in sequence like a structure being assembled in real time. "The succession clause requires evidence of compromised judgment," Selim said. "I'd like to discuss what compromised judgment actually looks like." He slid one more document. This is a fabricated compliance file. 12 pages. Built over 2 weeks using accessed personnel data. Designed to terminate a night shift nurse with no prior violations, as a pressure mechanism. Not against him. A pause. Against me. The room was absolutely still. Someone wanted to see how I'd respond when a person with no resources and no leverage was placed in an impossible situation. He looked at the table. They got their answer. Avery Osei, seated against the wall behind Selim, did not look up from his portfolio. Desmond Fay, seated 2 chairs to Selim's right, quiet as he always was watching the room with the particular attention of someone who already knew how this ended. Ellison Brand spoke. "Selim." His voice was even, practiced. "These are serious allegations. They require. They're documented," Selim said. "Just that. 2 words. Ellison stopped. "The proxy arrangements you've been building for the past 3 weeks are also documented," Selim continued, "including the conversation where you described my cardiac event as," he checked one page, "an opportunity the board shouldn't waste." Someone at the far end made a sound. Not words, just a sound. The kind people make when the floor moves. Ellison Brand's composure held for approximately 4 more seconds. Then it didn't. Not dramatically. Not a collapse. Just the specific moment when a man realizes the room he thought he controlled belongs to someone else. "The 3 proxy votes," Selim said, looking at the board members who had committed them, "are your choice to honor or withdraw. I won't make that decision for you." He looked at each of them in turn. Not threatening. Measuring. "But I'd suggest you think carefully about what you want your names attached to when this documentation is filed with the regulatory body. Which it will be, regardless of what happens today." One of the 3 proxy holders, a woman named Sasha Drennan, who had been on this board for 6 years and had the particular look of someone who had just realized they'd been positioned without their full knowledge, said, "I'm withdrawing my proxy." The second, a man named Jerome Lattimore, said nothing for a long moment, then, "Withdrawn." The third didn't say anything, just slid the proxy form across the table face down. Ellison Brand looked at the table. Selim watched him. "Ellison?" Desmond Fay said from his chair. Quiet, for the first time in this whole meeting. "You should leave." No theater to it. No satisfaction. Just a door, opened. Ellison Brand picked up his portfolio, stood, and walked out of that boardroom without another word. The room held its silence for a full 5 seconds after the door closed. Then Selim looked at his CFO across the table. Compensation restructuring. The new position. Where are we? His CFO, a sharp, composed woman named Renata Cross, opened her own folder. "Ready for review and signature." Selim nodded. Then he looked at Desmond Fay. Desmond looked back. Something passed between them that wasn't spoken. An acknowledgement, not forgiveness. The methods had been real, the risk had been real. A man's livelihood had been genuine collateral in something Desmond had engineered, and Selim would not pretend otherwise. But understanding, the kind that exists between people who both know what it costs to build something that holds. "Vote on operational continuity," Selim said, turning back to the table. Passed. 8-0. 3 abstentions. And downstairs, across the city, in Mercy General Hospital on the 3rd floor, in the middle of a double shift, Darius Solen had absolutely no idea. The call came at 2:17 p.m. Darius was in the break room, cold coffee again, standing up, chart in one hand, phone buzzing in the other. Unknown number, local area code. He almost didn't answer. "Mr. Solen." A woman's voice, professional, clear. "My name is Renata Cross. I'm CFO at Rice Capital. I'm calling on behalf of the chairman." Darius set the coffee down. "We'd like to schedule a meeting at your convenience. Tomorrow morning, if possible." "A meeting about what?" he said. A brief pause. "An offer," she said. "One I've been asked to present to you in person." He showed up at 9 a.m. Suit he'd had for 3 years. Pressed careful. Shoes that still held a shine if you worked at it. The building was the kind of building that made you aware of your shoes. 42nd floor. A room with actual morning light in it. Not the fluorescent buzz of Mercy General, but real, open, clean light. Renata Cross was already there. She stood, shook his hand, gestured to the chair. Darius sat. She opened the folder, slid it across. He read it, read it again, then looked up. "Executive Patient Liaison," he said. "Medical Operations." "Correct. This is a senior-level position." "Yes. At a capital firm. At a firm that is expanding its healthcare investment portfolio and requires someone with direct clinical experience and," she paused, "demonstrated operational judgment under pressure." Darius looked at the salary line. He'd made more in the last 4 years combined. He looked at the benefits structure. Full, comprehensive, dependent coverage, and that word dependent hit him somewhere specific because it meant Kaysen, it meant Malachi, it meant Ezra. He looked at the last line. Equity component. He read it twice. "This is an ownership stake," he said. "A partial one, vested over 3 years. But yes." He looked at the folder. The room was quiet. "Why?" he said. Not suspicious. Not defensive. Just honest. Because Darius Solen had learned, a long time ago, that when something appeared in front of him that looked like relief, the most important question was, what does this actually mean? Renata considered her words. "The chairman believes," she said carefully, "that people who make the right call when it costs them everything are exactly the people that systems need more of, and that those people deserve more than survival." Darius sat with that. A long moment. "I have 2 infants," he said. "My cousins. I'm currently their caregiver. The dependent coverage applies immediately upon signing. And my brother requires ongoing medication management. Benefits are effective day 1. He looked at the folder again. Then out the window. The city was doing what cities do, moving, building, carrying itself forward in its chaotic, ordinary way. He thought about $62.14. He thought about 11 days of planning entry routes and memorizing camera angles and warming bottles one-handed in a hospital break room. He thought about room 1703. A man on the edge of a bed at midnight, holding out one hand. No explanation. No performance. Just here. I've got one. Give me one. Darius exhaled slowly. Picked up the pen. Signed. Renata closed the folder. Stood. Shook his hand again. Welcome, she said simply. He took the elevator down. Crossed the lobby. Pushed through the glass door into the morning. Stopped on the sidewalk. Stood there for a moment in the light. No plan to run. No next problem to calculate. Just this exact moment. And then he kept walking. Because that was the thing about Darius Solen. He didn't stop to hold victories. He just kept moving toward whatever came next. That afternoon, Selim Rice was leaving Mercy General. Final discharge, paperwork signed, security detail waiting at the curb. When he turned down the 3rd floor hallway one last time, he didn't have a reason. He hadn't planned it. He just turned that way. The floor was its usual rhythm. Carts, charts, that particular energy of people who don't stop because stopping isn't an option. And then, at the far end of the hall, Darius, walking toward him, coming off a shift handover, still in scrubs, badge clipped on, moving with that forward-only stride that Selim had been watching for a week. They saw each other at the same moment. Neither stopped. They kept walking, toward each other, past. And in the moment they were side by side in that hallway, 1 second, maybe less, Selim looked at him. Darius looked back. No words. No explanation needed. And then they had passed each other and the hallway continued and the floor kept moving and the city kept doing what cities do. But something had happened in that 1 second. Something that 6 years of building and loss and deliberate emotional distance had not been able to produce. Because Selim Rice, a man who had not smiled in 6 years, was smiling. Not wide, not performed, not the kind of smile you put on for cameras and board meetings and the particular theater of power. Small, real, the kind that comes from somewhere that doesn't answer to logic. He was already at the elevator by the time it happened. He didn't explain it to the security detail. Didn't try to name it in the car. Just sat with it, quiet, let it be what it was. And that was enough. That was more than enough. Because some things don't need to be announced. They just need to be true. And this was true. If you stayed with this story all the way to the end, thank you. Truly. Stories like this one are why this channel exists. If Darius's strength moved something in you, or if Selim's choice at 1 a.m. said something you needed to hear, drop it in the comments. Tell us what hit you. Your words inspire more people than you know. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button right now and turn on notifications. Because the next story coming to this channel is going to hit different. You don't want to walk into it late. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that doing the right thing, even when it costs you everything, is never the wrong move. We'll see you in the next one.